Do you remember MacGyver? If you're my age, you probably do remember that guy that solved everything with his army knife, and nothing else, just his brains. And today we talk to Leslie Grandy, and she thinks that ChatGPT and the AI is our modern Swiss army knife. So it's the tool we have to get us into a creative phase, to get creative work done, in a sense of more like general, not creative, less creating pictures, but how to get out there to do your stuff, to have a thought partner, to have someone you can check your ideas with, someone you can ask and use creative frameworks to come up with new ideas. But today we don't talk just about MacGyver, we also talk about Terminator 2, because Leslie Grady, yes, we have her here as someone who gives you business advice, but she also was in the team that produced Terminator 2. And hey, that's quite a connection to that podcast, because you all know I asked the Terminator question, and she was actually in the best of the Terminator movies in the production team. So what a great episode. And yeah, before I talk too much, let's just start with the episode. Welcome to the Beginner's Guide to AI. Dietmar from Argo Berlin at the microphone. And now let's go. So, before I talk too much here, I think Leslie can introduce herself better than I can introduce her. And the thing is, first, Leslie, welcome to the podcast. That's the most important thing here.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And what did get you into AI or thinking about AI? That's really a thing that's always interesting.
Yeah, I think it became necessary to think about all the ways that AI might be leveraged. And I felt like a lot of people were focused on automation and operational efficiency. And one of the things that has stood out to me is what a great thought partner, creative collaborator AI can be for me to really challenge my own thinking, stay curious and ask questions. And so I kind of dived in with that natural curiosity of, I wonder how I might find out what is the limitation of AI and what's the opportunity by just trying to use it in different ways. And so in my evaluation and exploration, I realized this was a little gap for people, to think of it really more like a collaborator as opposed to a system or a solution provider, right? And so to me, that really was the area I wanted to explore.
So you started basically with the private stuff, you experimented and thought, okay, that's great, let's go business with this, or?
Well, no, I wanted to test what might get better output for me, because I felt like a novice. I wasn't sure my prompts were being engineered correctly, and I was just seeing this flood of social content saying, here's a prompt to use, here's a prompt to use. But I also felt like it was focused on the wrong thing to do that. It made word choice in my prompts my primary focus, and I kind of, garbage in, garbage out. And you also, if you're very specific, you could limit your field of vision. And so I wanted to try something that would be more open-minded, more open-ended, something that I would be able to really explore and iterate on without getting it right the first time. And so I looked at these creative thinking frameworks that exist today for people outside of the machine world, and thought, what would happen if you actually applied those to your conversation with AI? Would that be helpful? Would that be a waste of time? And would I get more value than engineering my prompt to this level of efficiency and accuracy that I got exactly what I wanted out of it by the way I asked the question? And so the great thing about creative thinking frameworks is they're naturally structured in a way to open the door to possible answers, as opposed to limiting your view to reduce the noise. And that openness really, I think, expands how you might think about something, what your perspective could include. And that's what really fascinated me.
This is like, I remember all this thing. I'm not a search engine guy, but there's always the people who optimize pages for the machine without thinking about the human behind it. I think that totally.
That's so spot on. I really like that you brought up that analogy, because even today, I wonder when I'm going to the internet with a question, whether it's worth it to put it into Google or whether I should put it into Perplexity. Because I wonder again, if even with AI coming to the top of the Google search results pages, if the words I put into the box, which again, typically I had used different kind of word engineering to create a search term, right? Left out a lot of things, decided that the more words I put in, the less answers I might get because I'd be so specific. I now have to do something similar with AI, so why not consider both of them as possible sources for my investigation? And so as I've gotten more familiar with the benefit of actually using these frameworks with a AI a partner versus Google search, I get much further faster.
Yeah, really. This is like if one thinks about what's now AI generated out there, even worse. I mean, things get yeah. So this is like the searching part, and the other part is the creative part. I mean, giving a tool, a partner, you say, to the people. What does it do to them?
Well, I think there's two things. I think it um, gives them uh, access to ideas they might not have come up with on their own, and they can discern whether they're useful or valuable or meaningful to them, but it gives them probably a broader set of things to consider. I think the other thing that it does is that it enhances confidence, because if you use these frameworks and you see how productive you can be in getting to iterative ideas and refining and then exploring maybe tributaries of those ideas, you actually get a sense of self-efficacy, like, oh, all right, I might not know the answer, but I can be a partner in guiding the insights as they come back, right? To iterate to something that's more meaningful to me. Okay, I see how you maybe made the mistake interpreting my question. If you looked at that word from this lens as opposed to that lens, would it give you a different answer? Would it give you a different response? And I've done that multiple times where it's come back with the wrong interpretation of my question. And I was like, oh, I realized I probably didn't clarify. Now, if I clarify, what would you say? And so now I've got this, you know, ongoing conversation, a dialogue, which is very hard to do with a search engine. You can't really dialogue with a website or a search engine. So this to me is really that partnership, because it's the batting it back and forth. Go wider, go narrower, add this element to it, but you're doing it collaboratively with someone with psychological distance, i.e. the machine. And so therefore they're not as attached to anything they put out there. And if you want to redirect them, they're happy to go down another path.
Yeah, that's one of the things. This feeling, this gut feeling. Ah, I can't do that now. But then you realize, okay, no, it's a machine. You can do it, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You can ask it that question and find out it was a dead end. And that builds your confidence because you've explored it and you've looked at why it doesn't work, and you can question why it didn't work. But now all of a sudden you understand, oh, the next time I do this, I need to frame it slightly differently, or I need to ask the question in a way that gives me a wider field of vision. And so I think that's the other part of enhancing confidence, is you get better at the questions you ask of the problems you're trying to solve.
Also in real life, probably. This is
Yeah.
a thing that's realized. No, but do tell me about the creative frameworks that also probably leads into you wrote a book, Creative Velocity. I'm sorry, Velocity. Those words, all those
Yeah,
lip-on
no
verb
worries.
phrases are hard. But yeah, great. So do tell about the frameworks and what got you into writing this book.
I think there's a lot of people who just don't think they're creative by nature. And I think a lot of people like myself, when I was younger, believed that you were either born a creative type or you weren't. And I think in organizations, the fact that we have creative functions like marketing and design make other people feel potentially like they're less creative, like they're not part of it at all. And so in that scenario, people lean back and they don't really add the value they could. if they had that confidence. And by adding the value, I mean asking good questions, looking for answers in different places, and feeling like you could put together two ideas that didn't naturally go together originally. And so I think the idea that the book was really the brainchild of my own experience of building confidence in my creative capacity, but recognizing that didn't mean I had to be an artist to be creative, and that I could be creative in how I think about problems and how I navigate the world with decisions that I make, and how open I am and curious I am to learning new things and applying those to potentially new domains. And I think it's great to have that open curiosity, but it's hard to not be emotionally attached to your ideas or to the problems that you're trying to solve. And so I realized in writing the book that the frameworks are meant to get you out of that sort of pocket. What would happen if you applied those frameworks with your Gen AI partner? Would that really help you find a new creative superpower? And so these frameworks are things that have been used and studied by cognitive scientists for years, but they're methods, and this is a great one to use with AI, like contradictory thinking, whether it's paradoxical thinking or opposite thinking or inversion thinking, where you're actually purposely taking the antithetical position to what you have to look at a situation from the exact opposite outcome than you want. And that's a framework that allows you then to plan for those eventualities, not ruminate on catastrophe, but to plan for the things that might be outside your field of vision, but could limit your success criteria, right? They might not actually empower you to think about them because they're not inside the lines. And so again, Gen AI as a partner can take you outside of those lines and look at these things that you might think are on the fringe, but could have catastrophic impact on your plan. And so I think that's one example of a good framework. Another really great framework is one called Scamper. And Scamper is terrific because it gives you an acronym for words that you should apply to your problem. What if we substituted something here? What if we combined two things here? What if we magnified or minified something? And would that change it? How attached are we to those things that exist today that we couldn't find a substitute, right? That might be more substantial and more impactful than what we've chosen originally. And so it's giving you the questions to ask. And the last framework, which I personally think is the most important just in human life, is the generic parts technique, which is kind of teaching us all to be MacGyver. The generic parts technique really has you look at what you have around you and what each thing does in its functional role, and recombining or reusing them to create a new solution to a problem that you're facing. And I think in everyday life, this is a great technique to get really good at, because imagine you're on a hike and you need a splint because you twisted your ankle and you don't have a splint with you. So what would you turn to in nature that could help you strengthen your walk so that you could make it back down from your hike, right? So even in a day-to-day life, this kind of thinking really helps you break down what you have and reconstruct it into something that's a novel solution to a problem at hand.
This is so great, MacGyver. I mean, the audience is, I have to say, is more or less older, so we probably have all the same MacGyver in our heads, because there's another MacGyver, there's a new MacGyver, but yeah, this is I have this guy with the 80s haircut in my head.
Yeah, the OG MacGyver is the thing, right? That's what you have to think about, because it didn't matter what kind of a problem he was facing. His first move always was to look at what was available and to reconsider how to use it to get out of that pickle, right? To get out of that bind. And
Yeah.
I think it's so inspiring when you realize that's in all of us. That's not an art or a gene, right, that makes you creative. It's your willingness to look at the world that way and see these things as the sum of its parts, and then also deconstruct it into the parts and apply them in new ways.
Do you have actually a practical example for the business world, where kind of the ChatGPT is your Swiss Army knife, your MacGyver knife? Can you share something there?
You know, it's so interesting that you said it. When I when I was working at Best Buy, a consumer electronics retailer, we wanted to do a scrappy prototype of something. And we didn't have all the resources and all of the time or any budget, which are your normal business constraints. So, how do you do a prototype when you feel that constrained? And at the time, there was no chat GPT. So we, literally said we MacGyvered a solution with $20 prepaid Android phones, $20 prepaid Android phones, and we put some apps on them and we handed them out to people and then we watched how they were used. And then I thought when I was writing the book, I wonder what chat GPT would do with that problem now that it exists. And it's fascinating because it 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 didn't mirror exactly what I did, but a lot of the elements that we put in our solution were picked up by the chat GPT response. And it made me realize how much faster I could get insights and prototypes built if I thought of, all right, I want to get this answer, and this is what the pieces of it are. How do I put that into a prototyping state that I could get that learning? And in that scenario, I realized, oh my gosh, I probably would have gotten there faster if I had had that question in and switched on the machine, right? And I could see how close it got. I thought, oh, that's really fascinating. I think that's a really great business example. You have limited budget, you have limited resources, you have limited time, and you have these assets available to you. Now, figure out how to get this outcome from that mix of things is a great version, right, of combinatorial creativity. And I've done the generic parts technique by saying, here's the elements that we have.
That totally makes sense. I mean, I remember those the Don't Make Me Think, this book about web design, and he said that
Yeah.
you ask just some people and they find 80% of the problems, and those are the most important one. Or you can go to an agency and cost you $50,000. And I think the first step, you don't have to ask those people anymore around you, or so you just ask ChatGPT, and this is really the first.
And you have to find out how to evoke the right signals, right? And so you still have to have a good idea what your goal is, right? What your outcome is and what your problem statement is. And I think that's where a lot of people need to practice their creative problem solving is in really not limiting the problem statement to include the solution in it. You have to ask the problem in a broad enough way and then apply the techniques to bring in the constraints that you want. Imagine now, here's my problem. Imagine now I don't have any of these things that you would expect I would have. I'm still trying to get the same outcome, a solution to that problem that looks like X, right? In terms of it's deployable in any store. Anybody can use it without being trained. Like I still might have those goals for it, but how do I actually leave the door open for a solution I hadn't considered that might get me to that outcome?
Makes sense. If you put your solution in your problem already, ChatGPT, it's nice. It's always nice, and knows that you want to have the solution, gives it to you. But yeah, it's not what you want. Yeah, you have
Right.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to be, and that's what I'm saying. I think you have to be willing to look at it at that generic level. Everything at this, right at the most generic way of saying it. Another really great story I tell in the book is even in our prompts, we tend to use specific words as opposed to what are called hypernyms. So for example, if I said attach, that's a hypernym. But if I say staple, clip, glue, right? Those are specific examples of attaching. And if you were to put that into your solution, statement or your problem statement, that's going to limit ChatGPT just as much as it will limit you.
Oh,
And so to think about the broadest way, the most generic way of doing something will bring back the broadest possible solutions.
this is really eye-opening, because this is also, it is prompt engineering in a sense of, but you have to think more about it. It's not like using some strange things like tip the GPT and gives better output, but which might work or
Right.
not. But it's getting a step. It's also, if you would think about giving something to a human. And this is the same thing. If you attach something, if you clip it or whatever, you would also pre-configure what comes out. Yeah, totally makes sense. But you have to really think about what you put into the machine then, I guess.
Right, and I think instead of thinking of it as prompt engineering, I think this is a problem statement lesson, no matter whether you are writing a prompt or not, right? To me, I think people define the problem statement so specifically that they sometimes ignore other places to look for an answer. And so that is true in real life. It manifests in prompt engineering, but in my general belief, it's true with any engagement, whether you are using the machine or not, that the words you choose matter. And so that's why I kind of think of it a little bit more broadly than prompt engineering, because even if you didn't use Gen AI and you tried to solve that problem and said clip instead of attach, right? It's going to remove glue, right? It's going to remove other things that could be sticky.
Yeah. No, but this leads to a thing that I find really interesting, and when I teach AI, I always have the example that my wife tells me something and I misunderstand it because she's not framing it right, and or like predisposition. This is what you have to do, and there's actually another thing she implies, but she thinks about it and whatever. But what you really talk about is communication, real good communication.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to your point, what you also were, I think, calling out was the potential for bias and understanding that you can tip the scales to point someone unintentionally because you have a personal bias towards that answer. And so you can tip, your spouse to think about a problem a certain way based on the word choice you use. You can do the same and bring that bias to your question in one of your AI partnerships, right? You can make that the same mistake is bring the bias of, don't include this or think about this, or experts, it's using and leaning into expert opinion as opposed to novel, unexplored territory. And so if you have a bias towards getting someplace quickly and it may take time to iterate it, you're therefore going to get less out of the machine, just like you might get less out of your colleagues, right? In a meeting, it goes just as poorly if you try to get everybody just to sign on to understanding the answer and only that answer, as opposed to contributing and broadening the conversation.
This is so interesting because bias sometimes, or like let's say if people think about bias, they think about like right, left, male, female, black, white, whatever those typical things. But that the bias can be how you use words.
Totally.
It's
Totally. Well, I think it's also a bias towards what you choose to value, and it's really interesting. I have in the book some logic puzzles. I want you people to practice and really connecting the dots of different things. And so one of the logic puzzles I created, so I knew the answer, I gave to Chat GPT, and I thought, oh, if I was reading the book, maybe I would do that, and it would be okay. But I thought, like, for me as the author, I wouldn't mind that, but I thought I should see what Chat GPT would say when I did that before I published it. So I gave it the logic puzzle. It had like 13 facts. They were all declarative sentences, separate declarative sentences. And the puzzle was to decide who lived in the red house. And so the clues were like the dog is in a house that's next to the cat, and the fish couldn't be in a house with a cat. And and so you have to kind of back into the answer by sort of aligning the facts and sort of laying it out. And the first time I gave it to ChatGPT, it just ignored 3 random facts that I gave it, just totally ignored it. And I wondered why it did that. I was like, that's so strange. Why did it not contemplate or include that in the analysis? So I asked them, why did you ignore these facts? And they said, oh, you're right. Let me do it again. And it randomly ignored 2 different facts the next time. And then the third time I said, well, I designed the puzzle and here's the answer. Did I miss something? Is this puzzle answer wrong? And it said, oh, no, you're totally right. And then it ran the puzzle the way I wrote it, and it got to the answer. But its bias was to throw out some facts as being trivial. right? Its bias was to actually focus on not 100% of the facts, but the ones they thought were, that the machine thought, for whatever reason, was most valuable. And it had no real basis in my understanding of that value and why those were missed. And no explanation was really given. It just reran the puzzle again. So I think sometimes biases can be also in ascribing value to things. And if the machine is already tossing out certain facts as not being as valuable as others, that's a form of bias. And so we have to think, not only are we bringing bias to it, but we have to challenge the answers we get from AI to make sure the machine's answer isn't precisely correct, isn't the point, as much as what's your logic? Why did you not include those 3 facts, right? So instead of me saying you're wrong, I said, please explain why those 3 facts were not included in your answer. So I could learn. Right. And so I think that's part of it, is understanding that the machine might have bias, and challenging its answer gives you an understanding of whether it's actually demonstrating bias or whether it had logic for why it excluded those facts.
Yeah. This is really interesting because this is a mirror for yourself. So, but you have to still be in a driver's seat and see what does the machine do, and you have to think about it, and that helps you. But also you can miss things. Yeah, right. This is like two things. This is two-sided things, and yeah.
Yeah, and throughout the book, every time I have in each chapter, I talk about a framework, and then I say how to partner with generative AI on it, and I repeat time and again in each chapter, challenge the results. Don't assume accuracy, but also don't assume that it has meaning and an understanding of what's important to you or your customers, right? That the thing that you value is actually addressed in the answer or the outcome. And it doesn't necessarily know what's going to trigger an emotion or what's going to be perceived as being off color for a particular audience. And so to challenge the answer is part of the role of being creative, right? Is really to understand the answer, not just to say you're wrong. But explain to me why you gave me that answer so I can understand, did I miss something or are you being biased?
Totally makes sense. No, this is like it's a machine. One has to really. The answers sound so much human-like, but the machine, it doesn't live in the world, so we have to be there.
Totally.
For which audience did you actually write the book? What was your intention?
Well, my career has been mostly in product management and working in product management. And I think it started primarily as something I thought about product managers really benefiting from, the idea that not only are they strong at operation or strategy, but they're also creative and they're creative problem solvers, and that they feel empowered to be that way, whether they have a job that they think is creative or not. As a human, it's their kind of right and responsibility to leverage their creativity to do the best at their job. And so I started thinking of the audience as being people over the years that I've managed and supported and coached. But over the course of writing the book and providing drafts to different people, people who I valued, people who I wanted endorsements from, reviewers, I actually feel like that wasn't in the writing, it was in my head. Like I really was targeting that in my thinking. But what people really understood is that this is something both personal and professional. That even in your personal life, you may be driven by task lists and responsibilities, and you may not leave time for yourself to come up with a creative solution to a personal problem you have. And so one of the people who endorsed the book called it a life hack handbook because they thought of it in personal terms. Like when they read it, they thought, oh my gosh, I could think about a problem I have differently using these techniques and using generative AI. But I also think there are people like who are entrepreneurs who get really in love with their idea and don't necessarily see the creativity that exists around that idea, right? Because they have blinders on, the creative solutions that might actually enhance that idea. And so sometimes you really need to kind of remind people who are ideators that they have still a tunnel vision on where the solution lies. And so it can be for those people as well. It's also something I've seen really helpful for salespeople who feel blocked, right? Like I've hit a wall. I'm not really able to reach the goal I have. I'm stuck. And so this is also a way to get unstuck, right? To think about the worst thing that could happen is a really great thing for both an entrepreneur and a salesperson. Nobody buys my product. Well, how do I fix that? What do I have to do to make that not be the outcome? And so working through, general problems that you may encounter in your personal professional life, I think these tools are really useful for that. And the more I put the book out in the world and get feedback from people, the more I see people bring that to the book. So my intention might have started out a little more narrowly, but again, in how I wrote it, I think I wrote it in a way that was able to be meaningful and helpful to people outside of a product management function.
Oh yeah, that's totally interesting. So the concept of, and if one I first thought creativity and creative velocity is like, okay, for creative people, but it's for everyone. And the interesting thing is, I worked for ages in the entrepreneurship sector, different roles, and there was so many people so focused on their solution for the problem, and they would have so much profited from asking someone else. And I was sometimes the person, and I had people crying in front of me because I told them, yeah, with ChatGPT that's much easier, much earlier in the stage. That's really great, I love it. And with the second thing I realized from this is the fear of the blank page. I always think about the author or whatever, but also no, you talked about salespeople can have it the same. They are stuck somewhere. It's like not the page in
The
the sales.
pitch isn't working, or the customer pain
Exactly.
point isn't acknowledged in the story. And there's a whole chapter in the book on storytelling, because one of the things that you have to be good at when you tell a story is world building and perspective shifting. And if you're trying to sell people and you can't create a picture of the world with your product in it that they have to be in as well, or you can't shift a perspective to understand why they don't see the value in what you're doing, you are going to just keep hitting your head against the wall. And so storytelling really requires empathy, perspective shifting, and world building, so you can really appreciate what the circumstance is that you're creating for somebody and then move them enough, right, to act on it. And so I think, yeah, I was excited to see that that was the reaction of salespeople that I've shared it with as well, is that this is really a tool I can use to, unblock my thinking on how to attack this account or how to sell my product.
Yeah, no, this is really broadening my view just now at that moment. So it's like ever this is not, and the interesting thing is at that moment you might even don't in the old world before AI, you were just like, I'm at this point, I don't know what to do. And you don't know where you got stuck. And now you have someone you can ask. Um
And even if you don't have I'm sorry, even if you don't have access to Chat GPT at that moment, the frameworks are still good crutches, right? And if you're, in one of those things, I was talking to one of the people I interviewed, who was an entrepreneur. She was pitching an idea to a family member, and he said, "Well, what if this doesn't work?" And she said, "Okay, I'll learn from it. I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I'm going to lose everything. The worst thing that could happen if this fails is that I would lose everything. So I'm going to be financially protective of that situation." And so, again, just using it to imagine I might not succeed. How do I make that less bad? Right? What do I do to make sure that if I could have risk, I've managed to think about that risk in the most holistic way possible, as opposed to from a position of angst because I'm in it, like I've lost the momentum or something. And and what I'm on a board of advisors of a startup, uh, uh, AR VR startup that originally started in the real estate market. And the goal was to really help people who were renovating an entire house, or builders, to see the property that was for sale before it was built, and to be able to do sort of not just a walkthrough, but a real understanding, right, of the space and the dimensionality of the space and things. And then the real estate market has taken a hit, like everything else we talked about financially. Interest rates are bad. And also it's in the US, there's been a breakup of the buyer seller agency relationship. And so their startup was really hit at a difficult time economically. And then the fires happened in Los Angeles, and entire communities were devastated. And rather than pitching this to real estate companies and builders, they took that technology and they said, we need to show the city this technology so it can help people get back on their feet and rebuild communities. And so all of a sudden, something that wouldn't have been an opportunity when they were focused became an opportunity because they were open-minded enough to look at how to reposition what they had to a different value proposition for a different customer without feeling like they failed originally. And the idea that now all of a sudden this is a tool for urban planning and this is a tool for something that's an entirely different customer comes from the prospect of being open to your solution applying to other types of problems than you originally targeted. And a lot of entrepreneurs it's really hard for them to let go of that initial picture because they're not wrong. It's just bad timing, or they just don't have the story taught, in a way that everybody's picking it up. So I love that fact that within days, they're like, we could be helpful here. We can be completely helpful to people who don't know this exists, this kind of solution exists. And they've been getting amazing traction from city and state governments because they're invested in rebuilding the communities.
Totally makes sense. And now you have a thought partner with AI you can ask, and it's like if you're a bigger startup and that seems to be a bigger one, you have also people to talk to. But what if you're the solopreneur or
Right.
someone, or
Early on in the process and your audience just evaporated for some reason? How do
yeah,
you take what your great idea is and see if it has legs somewhere else?
yeah, or you're the manager that doesn't want to show weakness, and suddenly you have
Totally.
some, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's why I say that confidence building should not be understated. Not because AI is an authority and it taught you something, but because the process of interacting is what you learned, right? You learn from the back and forth, the challenging and the understanding and the uncovering of potentially unconventional ideas that you wouldn't have spent any time thinking about. And I think that's the other part is those have to get surfaced occasionally so that you can look somewhere else to make progress if you're stuck in that situation.
talking about stuck in the situation, I in my time wrote 2 books. The audience, they're in German, you don't have to search for them.
Okay.
But but Leslie, you just wrote a book. Did you use how, or probably, but how did you use LLMs, ChatGPT, to make your book better or write it?
So, a couple of different things. I love perplexity because I was looking for research and cognitive research in particular to really back up some of the hypotheses and narrative that I had. And one thing that I felt was not as easy was I didn't really enjoy the experience on Google search for academic papers. I felt like I had a lot of hunting and pecking and hunting and peck. The fact that perplexity both explains the answer and then puts the footnote there and then allows you to go see the source really helped streamline my access to a lot of research that I really felt was invaluable for me because it saved time, explained why it picked that particular research. I could decide whether I agreed or not that it was an influence or that the study was a good study. I still had to bring some discernment to it, but it really accelerated my discovery. I talked to you about also putting my exercises in there. I wanted to validate a lot of the exercises to see if there would be garbage that would come back if it was used with AI as a partner. So most of the exercises were validated by running them through ChatGPT. I used a bunch of different engines too, a couple of times to see if I made a statement, did they all agree that statement had merit? And if not, what were the areas that they would append to my statement? So if I were to declare something, I wanted to make sure that it had some legs, right? That it had some foundation, and not that it just always agreed with me. It didn't, and so sometimes it made me rethink my word choice or how much I leaned into that perspective. And again, from a writing perspective, I really mostly have to admit I use Grammarly. My mother was an English professor, and when I was a young kid and I went to overnight camp and I would write letters home, she would send them back to me corrected.
Oh
And
no.
so oh, it's terrible. Red pen, spelling error, putting a comma here, all those things. But because of that, I'm super sensitive that when I stream of consciousness write, I'm less thoughtful about my grammar. And so I often would lean into Grammarly, not accepting all of the changes because there are speech patterns that make me uncomfortable that Grammarly proposes that may be accurate but do not sound like me, are not or don't sound accessible. They sound highbrow, and I want to be more accessible. So I would look at them and say, "Oh, yeah, that is a better sentence construction. That flows better. It, I put the clause in the wrong place in the end of the sentence, and it should be at the beginning of the sentence. That's right." But there are times also where it just likes to put comma and then some, word that is explanatory of the previous phrase. And after a while of seeing it, I kept thinking, "Oh, that's just not how I talk. That's not how I write." I just don't want to accept those. So I use AI to uh, help me maintain good grammar to a certain degree, but also to balance my voice versus the accuracy of the grammar.
But in all, it saved you a lot of time, or make the book better.
I think it definitely was time saving, certainly on the research part. I think what it did is it made me more confident in the book that I turned in. I think it helped my confidence to see when the exercises I created from whole cloth worked. Okay, this is good. These exercises are getting to the point of what I want to say. Good. That's great. There was a way to validate that. I thought that was really helpful. I think it also enhanced my confidence because I didn't want to turn it into the publisher as a first time author with a lot of bad grammar mistakes. So on a lot of different levels, right, it helped build my confidence.
Oh yeah. That would be like asking friends and family, "This is a copy, please read that." And they mostly find it boring, and you don't know if they really read it and if they're really going to.
So I loved it. I had Grammarly, and a couple of times I would say, "I know this sentence is clunky, improve it." And then I might make it improve it 4 times before I picked the one I liked, right?
Right.
But they were my ideas. It's just that I felt that in each of the steps, the tools were there to make it better and to increase my confidence in the output I created.
I can imagine what I have in my mind now is like this Friends, the comedy setting. You have like 10 people sitting there talking about jokes, and then they produce one joke out of the 10 minds, and now you're sitting there in in your home at your computer as an author, and you're alone, and now you have someone to ask. It's great.
Totally. Writing is so solitary, but there's a moment where, just like with problem solving, you kind of get attached to the lane you're in and you kind of stick with it and you don't really challenge yourself to, move off of it. And so having that uh, voice, right, that even is the machine challenging, no, that's not exactly right. I can see why you would say that, but, and it made me feel better. It made me feel like, okay, I wasn't believing all my own stuff. And then occasionally it challenged me, just like I encourage people to challenge it.
That's actually great. So people out there, try to write books. I'm in my third book now.
Congratulations.
Just
I know what a
it's
task that is. That's amazing.
it's just I started, but in feeling better, I will take that as a segue into one thing where I really am looking forward to ask you, and it's about the Terminator and Matrix scenario, and but you, the audience, have to know Leslie actually is connected to the Terminator franchise. Do tell us about that.
So, my actually had a first career. I've had 2 careers. I've been really fortunate, and my first career was in the film industry. And, I'm a member of the Directors Guild of America, and I worked on, movies that were produced by Gail Ann Hurd, who was the producer of The Terminator and who owned The Terminator with James Cameron. And when I went to work for her, she and James Cameron were making The Abyss. And during my time working with her, Cameron wanted to make Terminator 2. And so she was the executive producer on Terminator 2. So I was her director of production. I was responsible for um, coordinating a lot of the different productions that she was involved in, and then occasionally working on set with some of the directors.
So at that time, so connecting your former Leslie to this Leslie now, you were working on a thing with supposed Robert, with had like some like this four answer thing. We all know that, and he always chose the bad answer and something like this. And now you have it; it's here. Did you think about that would really be happening, or?
No, I think one of the things that marks my career, both careers, although I was a little bit more focused in my film career than I was in my technology career, where I tried a lot of different domains and industries, still working in the same role. I think the thing that um, though ties them both together is learning from failure and avoidance of failure. So if we go back to sort of the contradictory thinking. Um, so many people move to Los Angeles to work in the film industry and don't get to stay and don't get the opportunities and don't get the job. To me, it wasn't an option. I didn't have any family. I didn't have anyone who could get me a job, but avoidance of failure was my strategy. So I just took any job, and every job led to another job, led me to meet another person, which just sort of had a almost a Forrest Gump or Zelig kind of thing where you just end up being at the right place at the right time, and that one connection gets you connected to another track. That's how it's been for me. I that strategy of, this didn't work, but I can still move forward. Or if it didn't work, but I didn't lose everything, then I'm still succeeding, right? Because failure is the only thing I wanted to avoid. And so always imagining how that would be. I thought, well, I have to take this next job, or I have to take this thing that I don't immediately think is the right door to open, but it may be lead me to somebody who knows somebody. So just that constant forward motion, really, I think, is the thing that uh, propelled me to be successful, because I couldn't imagine failure as an option, because my parents didn't really think going to Hollywood was a great idea for a career, and I just didn't want them to be right. So the idea that I would always explore some other avenue to get to the outcome of success was just, I think, my engine.
I have to really. There's this song. Do you know the road to San Jose? What is it?
Burt Bacharach, yeah.
Yeah. Where there's like about people they're parking cars and humping gas, and it's like all the people who failed going to Hollywood. But I can totally connect because I lived my life also like this. If there's a possibility to do something to not not fail, I took it, and I have such a strange career, so I totally can connect.
I think it's a sign of a open-minded person, right?
Mhm.
To do the unexpected, right? To be successful when doing something that isn't traditional or normally expected as a path from A to B, B to C, right? If you go A to C and then skip to F, is that okay? And is that actually a good experience for you and for your career? How do you know if you don't do it, right? If you don't try. And so for me, being a nonlinear thinker, it was okay to say, I'll start over here and end up over here. If that's the path to get there, I'm okay with that. And I think nonlinear thinking is something we probably share, which is the outcome is forward moving, and that's what's good. It may not be the outcome I wanted, but it does maybe move me closer. If I look at where I am from where I was, I'm moving, right? I'm moving forward. I'm still making progress. And I think that is really the kind of a hallmark of a creative mind, is somebody who can see it's not the be all end all, but it's on the path to something new that I maybe don't know about. Like, I didn't move to Hollywood saying I'm going to get in the Directors Guild of America. It was a serendipitous thing that happened over time that I was able to leverage. Right. And I think that's uh, being open minded to that gave me whole new possibilities out of the career that I hadn't anticipated, because I really wasn't that knowledgeable about what it would take to be successful.
Mhm. Let's connect that to AI or Terminator again, because I think I feel this is a human capability we have, and AI doesn't have that.
Totally. I think the reason that people struggle is because they get emotionally tied up in those choices and steps and the speed at which they get to where they want to be. And because AI doesn't have any of that, right? There is no expectation other than what was processed in it is please give an answer in under 30 seconds or whatever, but it still doesn't feel pressure. It'll still process, right? The idea that we can be our own enemy along that path is why having AI as a partner right now is really important, because it'll always keep psychological distance from your problem.
Mm.
And so that's the thing I think that really in the humanity of it is good in partnering, is it keeps me out of my own head, right? Out of my own problem space and makes me think of it in a bigger way. But on the other hand, it also makes me realize that I had to bring something to it, right? The resilience to keep trying, right? That wasn't a great choice, but I can move forward from it. I can still learn why that wasn't a great choice and move forward from it. And that resilience is also part of what you have to have with a creative collaborator. That wasn't the idea I wanted. Let's keep going. Let's keep pushing forward. So I think there's human traits that when partnered with the ones that come with LLMs, the psychological distance, the fast processing, pattern recognition, you take all of those benefits and then you marry them with the human capacity of discernment, right? Meaning and purpose. That's when you get magic.
Yeah. I totally see that. Yeah. But I have to. The Terminator has this positive and the things like we talked about, but there's also the negative side of this. Do you think a Terminator scenario or Matrix scenario is in any way realistic? Can we have that? Can that happen to us?
I think for it to happen, humans have to give up responsibility for the discernment, right? And of what is an acceptable role for the machines in our society. I think you can program the machine to be a robot and take all my tasks away from me, but is that really changing the meaning of my life? Right? So what is the human bringing into the mix? Because there will always be that experiential and emotional uh, perspective to it that even in a sentient computer will still be more programmed rather than flexible, because what makes me happy or sad when I watch TV may not make my husband happy or sad. So who is the machine emulating, me or him? Right? And so I think there will always be this need for the human element, the humanity of discernment and meaning, right? Whether it's cultural or societal or even just familial, right? What matters in my family may not matter in somebody else's family. And so it will be hard for all of those scenarios to be captured in the model anytime soon. Now, it will get better, and there will be attempts to mimic reactions and emotions, but what I value isn't the same as what my neighbor values necessarily. And so how will it know all of that? How will it be able to imagine all of that? And I think that's really the message of the Terminator, right? The way that Sarah Connor fights, right? The way that she stands up for humanity is kind of the message to me. That's why I love that movie as the message, because I think that's what she's fighting for,
Yes.
is the humanity in a world of machines.
Oh, that's great. I get goosebumps. Yeah, cool. That's really a thing. And I just watched Terminator, I think it's 4, where Arnold Schwarzenegger plays him again, and with living with a family. And there's the question if he loves his wife, and he said, not in a way humans can. And
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's laughing is the perfect one. Is that sarcasm? Is that out of, uh being mean, laughing at misfortune? We laugh at people who fall or pratfall, right? But are pratfalls different than other falls? And how do we know? Because it's context, right? When a comedian does a pratfall, it's context. And how do we make sure that that context goes with the reaction of laughing?
yeah, yeah. No, that's great. So
Right.
this
I'm
is
glad that was a good way to tie up the film career. That was a good
yes,
question.
perfect. I mean, I I was. We don't talk about when they made Terminator 2, and we were all younger then, but
Yeah,
it was one
totally.
of my top movies ever. So it's great
The
to
the
talk to
water
you about
worm.
this.
You love the water worm, the cop that was the water worm. that special effects cop that came in and he was like it looked like a water worm.
Oh,
Robert Patrick, I think his name is the actor.
I am not sure anymore. It's too long ago.
It's just amazing special effects in that movie. Just
I
amazing.
have to go back. I mean, we all loved Sarah Connor coming back, but the details. It's so long ago I watched that movie. I should go back to that again.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
good. That's good. I have a homework now. The waterworm. I will look for it. It's great. No, but the last thing we are doing on the podcast is the book comes out in May. You said. I hope we are live.
It'll be available the first week in May from major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, all the places you would imagine. There, if you pre-order, I don't know when the podcast will be shown, but if you are able to pre-order before the book comes out, we have some bonus content on my website, which is creative-velocity.com.
Great. So I put it in the show notes, and I hope we are like always. We try. We hopefully live then, and people you will see then if it's online or not. But anyway, you can buy Leslie's book, Creative Velocity. And the other thing is, where can we connect to you, Leslie?
You can connect to me on LinkedIn. I also have a Substack. If you want a Creative Velocity Substack, and so I publish a newsletter, it'd be great to have people sign up for that and continue to get tips and exercises and prompt coaching for creative problem solving.
Oh, that's great. It's not just the book, it's a little bit more. That's cool. I love it.
Great.
So, Leslie, thank you
so
for the podcast, and thank you. I adore you because this Terminator 2 thing, this is so great. But no, you gave so great insights, and I learned a lot. And yeah,
Thank you so much for having me. It was it was a fun discussion and not like any of the others I've had. So I really appreciate that.
I'm blushing. It's for the people who listen, I'm blushing.
It's terrific. Thank you so much, Dietmar. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks again, Leslie. That was an episode, Terminator 2. That was a movie. So, yeah. And the Terminator is taking over or not. Also, Leslie's answer really great that we still have the human, I don't know how it's called, the human creativity, like in the book Creative Velocity. But we have the special thing the humans don't have, and I hope that's what makes the difference. Yeah, so anyway, it's not about prompt engineering, it's about getting your input in the right way to the machine, and then a machine can really help you be as productive as possible in the business, in the personal side. Yeah, it's up to you. Get Leslie's book, look into it, and yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Also go to our newsletter page, argo.berlin.com/newsletter, to get all the podcasts in your inbox and some tips and tricks from us. Thank you that you were here and listening to that episode. Hope you are back in the next one. Signing off, it's Dietmar from argo.berlin.